Alright, so after the second minute, the situation has changed. Not a whole lot. I'm still waiting for my artillery to fall on Casa, so I have no indirect fire available for use against any of the enemy positions I've identified. As you can see, more enemy teams have been identified, spreading around Casa d'Antonio like a big double pincher movement. Platoon leader Austerman over here managed to make it from his little shack over here into the main building, shooting and killing an enemy soldier along the way in a rather heroic example of suicidal kind of bravery going on there. To the rear here, I have repositioned my reserve infantry teams from their position on the road behind this wall. I've moved them up to the next stone wall in front of their position. Hopefully from here they can provide some direct fire support. I'm also going to start laying down some area fire along the enemy positions over here. And I have a few more teams over here, mostly just taking a look around. We did spot one enemy, I think it's a scout team, all the way out here. Honestly, this one rather surprised me, because Bletchley Geek's forces were further out to the side of the map than I anticipated. I was expecting him to come down a couple of approach routes and concentrate on either Casa Finella, Casa Raposa, maybe securing Casa d'Antonio as a means of securing his flank while he made a big pivot around to the left, or he would have come against Masseria Emilia in force and did a very large hook maneuver down around behind Casa Albaneta, maybe taking Casa d'Antonio in the process, giving him 3 victory locations in the case of going down the left-hand side, or 3 victory locations going down the right-hand side, which would give him a majority of them. What I didn't expect was this kind of broad brush approach, and it leads me to believe that I have underestimated the total size of the enemy force. Because at first I assumed I was dealing with maybe 2 companies, now it seems like he has an entire battalion. Because if there's a company over here at Casa Finella and there's a company over here at Casa d'Antonio, then what is this over here, if not another company stretched out on this side? And if that's company stretched out on this side, he probably has another company linked in between these 2 positions, probably in this heavily wooded area down here. So, the full scale of the enemy attack is starting to sink into my mind, but for now, I'm still busy trying to rescue the last 2 guys from my position behind the fallback position at Casa Finella. I'm waiting for my artillery to fall. There's not a whole lot I can do over here right now, and there's not a whole lot I can do over here right now, aside from repositioning my reserves and laying down some direct fire. So with that being said, we'll move on to the next turn, and we'll see some action. Alright. So, thanks to the actions of the heroic defenders of Casa d'Antonio, the enemy has so far been prevented from setting foot inside the objective. And one thing I also noticed was some enemy contact markers back here in the woods. You gotta kind of zoom the camera back in order to see them. I assume Bletchley Geek at this point had run into my minefield, and decided that maybe trying to approach through these trees is not that good of an idea. One thing also to note is enemy contacts continue to stretch out behind Casa d'Antonio in these bushes over here, and my heavy machine gun team over here and infantry teams are engaging enemies in these woods over here, but we'll get more into that at a later time. So, my plan for how to deal with the situation at Casa d'Antonio is starting to firm up now, as I'm fighting the battle. My reserves that I had moved in down by this stone wall over here, this small team, I didn't want to waste all of my submachine gun ammunition, so I actually had put a, I don't know if it shows up, I'm pretty sure I put a cover arc, otherwise they just didn't spot anybody that turn. I decided to let my light machine gun teams do the majority of my shooting. As you saw, this light machine gun team behind the wall over here did pretty good execution against the enemy over here in the bushes. The defenders inside now have a very easy direct fire line heading straight across the leading edge of the enemy force that was moving down this bush path over here. And as you can almost kind of tell, it could be the low visibility that's blanking them out, but later on I'll have a look at the casualties on the ground. The casualties that the enemy are taking over here are actually rather horrendous, which is probably why he tried to move through the woods over here as a means of bypassing this little killing zone I had set up over here. The rest of my teams are in position. These guys, basically it's a submachine gun team with a rifle grenade. They're not going to be shooting a lot, but there is another light machine gun team over here. There's a heavy machine gun team set up behind the wall over here, and then this guy, who is the only survivor of the team that was in this two-story building over here. He actually managed to get over here, link up with his other machine gun team, and he's going to contribute the weight of fire of his own gun to the defense, despite the fact that his status is now officially broken, which basically means there's really not much that he can do anymore. But for now, my defense of Casa d'Antonio is simply going to take the form of area fire being directed against the lead enemy elements on the left side and on the right side over here. This kind of flanking maneuver by the enemy, I had first assumed that maybe he had a platoon here, he had a platoon here, and this was probably his third platoon that he'd sent around in an attempt to flank the position. But we'll figure out what's going on over there a bit later. I'm gonna look at the enemy turn, actually, after we're done covering the fight for Casa d'Antonio. But I do have a squad over here in position and a heavy machine gun team. They're busy tangling with them. We'll come into that later on when the kind of situation around here turns around. So I guess we'll move on to the next turn, take a look at the action, and I'll talk more after that. Now, at this point, I'm sitting here watching the defense of Casa d'Antonio, and I'm wishing that Elsterman had an infinite supply of ammunition. Because as you can see, he's down to about 25 rounds. Of course, he can borrow rounds from this neighboring infantry squad over here. But, I mean, the amount of guys that he personally has terminated of the enemy force is starting to reach some rather staggering levels. I'm pretty sure this guy is about to die next turn. So as you saw, the reserve infantry squad that I had moved up behind the stone wall here spent the entire next minute engaging the leading elements of Bletchley Geek's troops. Forgive me for speculating for a moment here, but I think it's going to be around this point in time that Bletchley Geek decides that his advance down this path over here is not really working. As you saw, there are more enemy contact markers in the trees now. There's still, I don't know if they're marking the mines or something, how many men ran into the mines, how many dead bodies are over here. Honestly, I don't remember. But one thing that did surprise me, I almost forgot about this little probe up against the very edge of the objective zone here. And if that kind of drew me to the mind that he probably has a team sitting right behind this shed over here. But honestly, at this point, I don't remember the specifics. As you saw, my idea of just ignoring the enemy over here is working just fine. The heavy machine gun team is on the bottom floor over here. Occasionally, they have a target over here that they're able to shoot at, but for the most part, they're sitting idle. Is that a lieutenant? Or I don't know what. I still don't know what rank that is. Osterman over here has basically just been mowing down enemy troops with his MP40 for several minutes, actually, at this point. The rest of his team is dead in this little shack over here, but eventually we'll be able to get around and medic them up. But for now, this heavy machine gun is kind of idle, and I'm sitting here trying to think of a way that I can use them to help out the fighting over here without getting them lit up by the guys over here, because I can't just move them back onto the second floor and tell them to go this way, because the enemy will detect them and start shooting. But that's going to be a puzzle we're going to have to solve. For now, this squad behind the stone wall over here is doing fantastic execution with both light machine gun and rifle fire, as well as their rifle grenades and their submachine guns. This team over here is still kind of sitting here and observing, because at this point I was not 100% sure if the enemy was going, if Bletchley Geek was going to try to move through this open area and flank around Casa d'Antonio or not, and I was determined to keep these guys hidden for as long as possible, because I don't think he knows I'm here yet. So if I can get him to kind of move out into the open and get detected, then he's going to get lit up by all these guys. In the meantime, the far flank of the fighting has kind of ebbed and flowed around a little bit. There's going to be a little bit of 2-inch mortar fire and things, but for the most part, this is just kind of a skirmish out here in the open. I think Bletchley Geek, I think what happened was he kind of advanced through the orchard, expecting maybe to find an open flank, or at least find a path and some other type of approach that he could make. And when he ran smack dab in a heavy machine gun team and a couple of infantry teams, he kind of decided not to advance any further over here, because this little skirmish action over here basically began and ended within a couple of turns. After a while, I'm going to pull these guys back, and there's going to be not much more contact over here until much later in the battle. But as I said before, that's going to be a completely different situation. Now, let me check. Okay, I still have not readjusted my mortars yet. I'm going to allow the artillery barrage over here to continue falling for probably another turn or two, I think. But eventually, I'm going to say, okay, I think I've given him enough high explosive, and I'm going to start retargeting it elsewhere. But that is not going to happen yet. So we're going to continue with the action at Casa d'Antonio. We'll see if there's anything else interesting to look at. I'm going to end this particular run at turn 80, and then we'll pick things up again some other time. I'm a busy man. I don't have all day to just sit here and talk into a microphone. Okay, bye.